I dated Jaxon when I was younger. 3 months, then we were done. Apparently, I was too much of a good girl, which, in his world, translated to boring. Trying to fix that, I copied my best friend, who was in her wild rebel phase. After 2 weeks of hanging out with her, she blew a perfect smoke ring in my face and said, "Sweetheart, just stick to your textbooks. The bad girl vibe isn't in your DNA." I took her advice. After a bit of soul-searching and realizing that love alone doesn't pay rent, I made a practical decision. Find a rich guy. That's how I met Marty. Wealthy, generous, and charming, with the kind of smile that could sell dreams. His only issue? A long trail of ex-girlfriends and an equally long list of female friends. Everything seemed perfect until the day his proposal ring was still fresh on my finger and a message popped up. A sonogram from one of his so-called friends. 8 weeks pregnant. Sitting across from her at a coffee shop, I stirred my latte slowly and said, as sincerely as I could, "My love for Marty is far too deep. I could never leave him. Why don't you keep the baby? I'm young, but I don't mind being a stepmom." I meant it well mostly, but judging by the way her jaw clenched, Isabel didn't think I was serious. Since I wouldn't dump him, she decided to educate me. She told stories of their romantic getaways, the Eiffel Tower, snow-capped mountains, New Year's Eve kisses. How he'd video call me to say he missed me, then hang up and sleep with her seconds later. Honestly, she had a gift for storytelling. For a moment, I forgot I was the villain in her tragic love tale. After 15 minutes, I glanced at my watch and smiled politely. "Sorry, I have to head back to work." The look on her face was worth framing. Total disbelief. As I stood and reached for my scarf, her composure cracked. "You're unbelievable. Clinging to Marty like that? You look like someone built to be a wife. Do you really think a man like him, who's seen every kind of beauty, would ever love someone like you?" Her words sliced through the hum of the cafe. I paused and turned to face her. Her expression twisted in anger, but even then, she was stunning. Far more beautiful than me. I smiled. But I didn't say a word. I hurried to the restaurant, breath fogging in the icy night air. Inside, the heat was turned up so high that I had to shrug off my coat and scarf, draping them over my arm as I followed the waiter through a maze of dimly lit corridors. We stopped outside a private room. I took a deep breath, bracing myself before pushing the door open. Turns out, no amount of mental preparation could have helped. The room was loud and alive, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and too many beautiful people. The first person my eyes landed on wasn't my boyfriend, Marty. It was Jaxon. My first love. He stood at the center of it all, a single diamond glinting in his left ear, radiating that same reckless charm that had once ruined my teenage heart. Jaxon. I mouthed his name twice, silently, like a ghost slipping from my lips, then forced my gaze away and searched for Marty. He was sitting in a corner booth, laughing with a woman. In the middle of their teasing, she reached up and playfully tapped his forehead with her knuckles. It was such a small gesture, yet intimate in a way that made my stomach twist. I knew her, of course. Marty's childhood best friend, the one he claimed was basically family. They had the kind of bond that was too close to be just friendship, but not quite enough to be love. I understood that kind of fear, the hesitation to cross a line you can never uncross. I even felt grateful they hadn't. If they had, there'd be no space left for me in his life. I stood there for what felt like forever, invisible to everyone in the room. That familiar wave of helplessness crept up, the same one I'd felt years ago. Walking into a private party just to find Jaxon surrounded by people who belonged to a world I never fit into. Back then, I pretended not to care because I loved him. Now, I pretended not to care because I loved his money. I walked over and tapped Marty on the shoulder. He turned, his smile faltering just a fraction when he saw me. I gave him my best calm smile, brushed a loose strand of hair from his forehead, and said softly, "Sorry, I had to work late." He blinked, as if waking up from a dream, and took my hand, rubbing it between his palms. "Why are your hands so cold? Didn't they turn the heat on?" "It's fine," I said lightly. "Just a temperature shock. Are you warm enough?" When I tried to pull my hand back, he held tighter. "I just don't want you catching a cold." The laughter around us dimmed for a beat, replaced by an awkward silence that prickled against my skin. Then someone spoke up, voice dripping with amusement. "Marty, is this the mysterious girlfriend we've heard so much about? The one who never shows up?" The voice came from a guy in a flashy jacket, slouched beside Jaxon, smirking like he lived for trouble. Jaxon sat back, flipping a lighter open and shut, the metallic click echoing in rhythm, his old tell when he was irritated. Marty stood, wrapping an arm around my waist. "Everyone, this is Clara, my girlfriend." "Girlfriend? She's wearing a ring," someone laughed. "When's the wedding?" My hand tightened reflexively before I forced it to relax. Marty's jaw flexed, but he quickly smiled. "As soon as you're all ready with your wedding gifts, we'll set a date." A few people snickered, but when Marty said, "She's shy, tease me if you want but leave her out of it," the teasing only got louder. Eventually, they dragged him off for more drinks, leaving me alone. With nothing to do, I sat quietly, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. I didn't like reality shows, games, or gossip videos. I just needed something to make me look occupied. When that failed, I turned to the food. Slowly, methodically, I ate pastries from the coffee table, tiny bites to make the time pass. 2 hours and 19 minutes. In that time, I finished a plate of green bean cakes, 3 cherry tomatoes, and 2 glasses of juice. And the whole time, I could feel someone's gaze burning into my back. But I never turned around. It was well past midnight when the party broke up. Marty had been forced to drink too much and was barely standing. A few girls tried to help him, but he waved them off, finally leaning on his childhood best friend for support. I followed with his coat and car keys, the perfect picture of patience and composure. Halfway out the door, Marty mumbled my name. "Clara." "I'm right here," I said softly. In the parking lot, I opened the back seat while his friend tried to maneuver him inside. Once he was settled, I said polite goodbyes to the group and climbed into the driver's seat. My eyes landed on the passenger side, where 2 coats were piled together. I realized I'd forgotten my scarf inside. Too late now. His friend was already waiting in the back seat. It wasn't worth going back for. Before pulling out, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. Jaxon stood outside, head tilted, lighting a cigarette. The faint orange glow lit his face, sharp and distant. I looked away and let out a quiet, humorless laugh, a mockery of the naive girl I'd once been. When I finally parked at Marty's family estate, I expected to stay and look after him. But the house was full of staff, and his best friend made it clear I wasn't needed. She also mentioned, in the gentlest tone possible, that Marty's parents preferred modest, reserved girls. Since he hadn't officially introduced me yet, I should probably keep a low profile. So at 2 in the morning, I found myself standing outside the gated community, freezing while I waited half an hour for my rideshare. Thank God for big cities, at least you can still find a ride in the middle of the night. But I regretted losing that scarf. The wind was brutal, slicing through my coat like glass. By the time I reached my apartment, it was 3 a.m. I dragged myself down the hall, numb with exhaustion. When the elevator doors opened, the faint smell of smoke hit me first. For a second, my tired brain thought someone's apartment must be on fire. Then I saw him, a tall figure standing in front of my door, surrounded by a scatter of cigarette butts. Between his fingers, a fresh ember glowed red. In his other hand, he held my missing scarf. I'd never imagined what it would feel like to see Jaxon again. As a teenager, I thought he had shattered my world. My heart felt broken beyond repair, and for a time, I wandered like a ghost, barely functioning. But time has a way of shrinking even the most dramatic heartbreaks. In the grand scheme of life, money, career, health, love isn't always the end-all. Besides, I was exhausted. There's a certain age when staying up past 11 leaves your brain in a fog, incapable of coherent thought. I fumbled with my keys, unlocked the door, stepped inside, and lazily moved to close it, hoping to end the encounter quickly. Then Jaxon's hand shot out, stopping the door. "We had something, you know. Not even a hello?" "That's harsh," he said, voice raspy from too much smoking. "I sometimes marvel at how different I am from others. This modern world seems to thrive on casual connections, exes on friendly terms, and occasional relapses whenever the mood strikes." I once discussed this with Maya, who had certainly reconnected with an ex or two. She explained it was nostalgia. Like a childhood toy, you don't need it, but picking it up brings back warm memories. I couldn't understand it then. But isn't faithfulness supposed to matter? Maya laughed at my old-fashioned naivety. The new definition of devotion is laughably narrow. People who pour their hearts out like you did? We call them simps. Back then, I tried to understand Jaxon through Maya's lens. I followed her to parties, met new people, observed their ways. I never fit in. I was never quick enough to grasp their lifestyle. The truth became painfully clear. Jaxon and I were from different worlds. He would never slow down for me. He didn't love me, not really. Maybe he only got with me for fun, while I foolishly devoted my heart to him. I had once traveled across the city on a whim, 2 hours each way, just to deliver pork ribs he casually mentioned craving. To him, it probably seemed pathetic. All I had to offer was my heart. I gave it freely and he tossed it aside like it was nothing. Later, I learned a hard truth. A true heart can't be exchanged for another heart. But it can be exchanged for something else. Money. Marty made sure I never lacked feedback. Each time he felt guilty over a friend, he'd shower me with gifts, jewelry, handbags, lavish things that spoke of indulgence and apology. Tonight's little inconvenience, the solo taxi ride home, would likely translate into another handbag tomorrow. And that was all I wanted. I didn't want to dwell on the past. I held the doorknob, staring at Jaxon. His face was lost in smoke, or maybe just dim light. "Are you here to return my scarf?" I asked, steady and calm.
"No," he said.
I nodded, gently pushed his hand away, and this time, I closed the door and locked it. Marty started inviting me out more often, into his world of friends, parties, and events. And Jaxon was always there. Through conversations, I slowly pieced together his new life. He was now a rising star in the racing world, heir to the Vance family fortune. It was surreal. The rebellious teen I once knew, who lived with his grandmother and cruised around on a beat-up motorcycle, had transformed into someone entirely untouchable. I remembered one of the few times I felt like his world included me. He placed a heavy helmet on my head, told me to wrap my arms around him on his bike, and promised to take me far away. Back then, I truly believed him. Around Marty's friends, I never hesitated to show how much I cared for him. At first, they teased us relentlessly. But after a while, even the jabs became background noise. Whether they secretly despised or envied me, I didn't bother to find out. As for Marty's pregnant friend, I had no clue how he handled that situation. But his treatment of me never changed, which gave me some comfort. Still, a subtle unease began to creep in. Maybe it was the way Jaxon's eyes tracked me, predatory and unblinking, or perhaps it was the faint lack of excitement in Marty when we talked about our wedding. I was always anxious that something would disrupt the delicate balance I had carved out. And of course, something did. During a weekend camping trip, Marty's phone rang. His face darkened instantly. "I'll handle it later," he muttered, slipping away. Moments later, he announced he had an emergency and needed to leave immediately. All eyes shifted to me. I had arrived in his car, and now he was clearly leaving me behind. I didn't know anyone well enough to hitch a ride, but I had no choice. Just then, Jaxon spoke up. "Marty, go handle your business. I'll give your girlfriend a ride home." Marty nodded casually. "Thanks, man." Clearly, Marty didn't care whether I stayed or left. I froze mid-stand, sinking back into my seat. Before leaving, Marty shot me a long, searching glance. I had a sinking feeling once he drove away, whatever we had was probably done. For the first time, I broke our unspoken rule. "Marty, I want to go with you. Be good. Listen to me," he said, frowning as he started the car and drove off. I remained motionless. My phone buzzed twice. A message from the friend, silent until now, flashed on the screen. She'd visited Marty's parents, and they had agreed to let her marry him. A warm weight pressed against my back. Jaxon leaned over my shoulder, glancing at my phone with a lazy smirk. "She moves fast." I lifted my lashes to meet his eyes. "Clara," he said, voice calm but sharp. "She has a good family, a beautiful face, and now she's carrying his child. What exactly are you bringing to the table?" "I thought you'd back off after the coffee shop," I muttered. "You didn't think that pandering to Marty would actually get him to marry you, did you?" Of course, I would have married Marty if Jaxon hadn't shown up. Now, with his parents involved, my chances were slim to none. I felt disappointment, but also an odd sense of finality. From the moment I saw Jaxon again, I knew my plans would never go smoothly. I tucked my phone away, ready to pack up and call a cab. The campsite was remote. It wouldn't be easy to find a ride. But it didn't matter. I would rather trek 2 hours down the mountain than sit in Jaxon's passenger seat. Charging cable, water bottle, sunglasses, I shoved everything into my bag. Jaxon followed silently, stormy and tense, watching every move. Finally, he lost it. He snatched my bag and flung it to the ground. Its contents scattered across the dirt. The clearing went silent. Everyone's attention shifted to us. I glanced at the scattered items. A shame, they were expensive. Normally, I'd have hurried to gather them, but exhaustion had dulled my energy. Sorry, you guys enjoy yourselves. I'm heading back, I said, keeping my voice steady. Turning and walking away empty-handed felt humiliating, and Jaxon tensed instantly. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. I stopped, raised my hand, and slapped him, hard. Gasps rang out. Jaxon's head jerked from the impact, but his hand on my arm didn't release. Feel better? He said, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. If not, want to try the other side? I didn't want a public scene with Jaxon, especially not in front of this crowd of wealthy kids who had never noticed me before. Maybe my stubborn, defiant look was pathetic enough to work in my favor. Jaxon clenched his jaw, then, with a reluctant compromise, let go of my arm and took a step back. Sorry. I blinked, forcing a deep breath to keep the tears at bay. He bent down, gathered my scattered things, and placed them neatly back in my bag. I'll drive you home, he said firmly. This time, he wouldn't budge. I avoided glancing at the faces of the onlookers. The sports car he drove gleamed under the moonlight. When I hesitated, he sighed. It's freezing. If you don't get in, how do you plan to get back? I'm not a kidnapper, Clara. I'm not selling you either. I stayed firm, face neutral. I don't know how to open a car like this. Low-slung sports cars had doors that swung upward. Only the beautiful passenger ever got to ride in one. Clearly, I didn't qualify. He stared at me for a long moment, probably not expecting such a refreshingly honest answer. Then he opened the door. Get in. The ride was terrifying. Maybe it was a racer's instinct, but Jaxon drove like a man possessed. I was half convinced he'd removed the brakes entirely. Several times, the car skidded dangerously close to the mountainside. My hands gripped the seatbelt until my knuckles whitened. Finally, during one particularly reckless turn, I screamed, "Stop the car!" The tires screeched. My body lurched forward, only to be yanked back by the seatbelt. Jaxon lit a cigarette and exhaled smoke lazily. You'd rather be a stepmother than leave Marty.
Why?
Do you really love him that much? I couldn't answer. You should have known after we broke up, he said, eyes on the road, hand holding the cigarette dangling from the window. You're not one of us. You should have found a quiet, normal life with someone ordinary. I laughed bitterly. Jaxon, really? You have no shame saying that. What right do you have to meddle in my love life? Have I ever done anything to hurt you? Ever cling to you after we split? Why is it that all your other exes get your blessing, but you can't stand to see me happy? I didn't fool myself into thinking he still cared for me. This, I realized, was exactly as Maya had warned. Something that was once yours, even if discarded, can't be possessed by anyone else. To Jaxon, I was never enough. Not rich enough, not charming enough, not fast or flashy enough. All I had was my heart, and that had once been worthless to him. Clara, I said softly, eyes wet, hands trembling as I fumbled with the seatbelt. I've never hurt you. Just let me go. Pretend we never met. Jaxon stayed silent. Then, unexpectedly, his hand pressed my shoulder into the seat. Before I could react, he grabbed my chin and kissed me hard. My gasp caught in my throat. I struggled, but the harder I fought, the more desperate his kiss became. He bit my lip, drawing blood. The metallic tang filled my mouth. My own whimpers only fueled him. I closed my eyes, tasting bitterness, tasting tears. His desire was fierce, but why? I should be the desperate one. I am sentimental, though few ever see it. As the middle child, always overlooked, I learned to hide my emotions. I rarely cried in front of anyone. Yet Jaxon had been the cause of the only 2 times I'd ever shown real emotion. Once, begging him not to leave. Now, begging him to let me go. And still, Jaxon's answer was always no. He drove me home, the car idling outside my building long after we arrived. Finally, he handed me a sleek black credit card, voice rough. Spend whatever you want. Generous as always. He could give me everything, money, comfort, freedom, but not the one thing I truly wanted. I examined the card, then placed it back in his wallet. I don't want anything but marriage, I said quietly. And I knew, just as I had always known, the one thing I wanted most was the one thing Jaxon could never give. Marty disappeared for several days. Every message I sent seemed to vanish into a void. Honestly, it was probably for the best. Otherwise, I'd have had to explain the cut on my lip. I told Maya about it. She shook her head and laughed. You're unlucky, Clara. Jaxon is your personal black cat. Nothing good ever comes from being around him. She also scolded me for refusing his black card, insisting that after what happened, I should have at least taken advantage of the gesture. But what's done is done. She reminded me that, at least, Jaxon was still hot. It wasn't a total loss. By the time I left work that day, her advice had run its course. I was silent, carrying my own thoughts. When I stepped outside at 5, there was Marty, leaning casually against his BMW, one hand tucked in his pocket, a smile that made my chest tighten. He rarely picked me up from work, but when he did, it was always a small display, flowers, an attentive smile, the kind of gestures that lingered in your mind. But today, there were no flowers. A shadow of fatigue in his eyes hinted at something more serious. I guessed immediately. He was here to break up with me. He didn't need to go through all this. A simple call, a text, even silence would have been enough. If he continued to ignore me, I would have understood the message. Yet here he was, inviting me to dinner at a high-end Japanese restaurant, and for once, he was the one doting on me. Our usual roles were reversed, and it made me slightly uncomfortable. Halfway through the meal, I spoke up. If you have something to say, just say it. I wasn't owed anything. I had known who he was from the beginning. Every gesture, every act, had been a conscious choice. I had only expected something in return. Marty set down his chopsticks, took a deep breath, and looked me in the eyes. Clara, let's get married. I hadn't considered that. I expected excuses, negotiations, maybe even silence. Never this. I've been dealing with something over the past few days, Marty admitted, cheeks tinged with embarrassment. It's selfish of me, but I want to keep you. He hesitated, then continued. I have a child on the way. The mother insists on having it. I'm legally obligated to support her, but it won't affect us. Our child will be the only one officially recognized in the family records. I blinked, processing the words. And she's okay with that?
Yes.
It's an agreement. We were young, and mistakes happened. Young. Convenient, isn't it? But none of that mattered. All I wanted was to marry Marty. Slowly, I nodded. Okay, let's get married. Planning the wedding brought out a side of Marty I hadn't seen before. Eager, anxious, almost frantic that I might change my mind. Why would I? Everything I wanted was right here. We picked a lucky date. Marty officially brought me home to meet his parents. Polite, distant, and cautious, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement. My willingness to be a stepmother in order to marry their son made them question my motives. Marty resisted. Guilty, frustrated, but ultimately, his parents' decision prevailed. I didn't mind. Marrying Marty was already a huge step. There was no reason to be greedy. My ambitions weren't extravagant. With Marty's wealth, whatever came to me would be more than enough for a comfortable life. I wanted marriage. I wanted a child. I wanted a good life for my family, stability, love, and happiness that I had never known. Marty could give me all that. What more could I possibly ask for? When I announced my engagement, my parents barely reacted. But the moment they learned that Marty came from money, their entire attitude shifted overnight. They had never expected much from me. Their only real hope was that I wouldn't become a burden. Throughout my life, I survived on scholarships, scraping by one exam at a time. I wasn't brilliant. Every passing grade was a product of long nights and endless repetition. I grew up in the background of our family. While my sister was praised for her looks and my brother was treated like the family's future, I was the one who filled in the gaps, watching my brother, doing errands, and keeping the house running. My parents' dream was simple. My sister would marry rich, my brother would inherit wealth, and I would stay quiet and self-sufficient. As long as I had enough to eat, they considered their job done. I learned early that I was a dim star in their sky, flickering faintly but never noticed. So really, it wasn't shocking that Jaxon broke my heart. I was a foolish girl desperate for affection, mistaking dependency for love, stumbling into pain, and calling it fate. My greatest flaw has always been the same. I don't know how to love myself. I kept hoping someone else would do it for me. Someone who would see past the calm exterior to the small, trembling heart inside, and hold it carefully. But why would anyone? There was nothing remarkable about me to begin with. Still, fate plays cruel jokes. I didn't find love, but I did find a man with wealth and influence. Marty was the kind of rich that could lift my entire family status with a single marriage certificate. When my parents heard about him, they rushed over, suddenly full of energy and ideas. In my tiny apartment, they sat planning how to spend my bride price. My brother talked excitedly about buying a new apartment, while my sister inspected my place with a mix of jealousy and disdain. I sat there, silent, the taste of bitterness rising in my throat. It wasn't the first time my family disgusted me, but it was the first time that feeling made me physically ill. As I gagged, the room went quiet. My mother's eyes lit up with a strange kind of excitement. "Wait, are you pregnant?" she asked cautiously. I froze. My sister's lips curled in realization. "So that's how you caught him?" "Smart move," she sneered. My mother rushed over to help me sit down, scolding me affectionately. "You silly girl. Why didn't you tell us sooner?" My brother clapped his hands together. "If you're having the Vance heir, we can ask for more money. We should double it." My father frowned slightly. "Don't be greedy. 30,000 is plenty for now. We'll let your brother-in-law find you a good job later, maybe even a rich wife for your brother. That's long-term planning." Their words blurred together, every one of them scraping against my nerves. I barely made it to the bathroom before I started throwing up again, clutching the toilet as if I could expel all the filth out of me. I had wanted so badly to marry Marty, to change my life, to escape the mediocrity and the family that never saw me. I had wanted all of it. But now, as nausea twisted through me, a single, horrifying thought took root. I might actually be pregnant, but the baby couldn't be Marty's. I adamantly denied being pregnant, insisting it was just stress from all the wedding preparations. Naturally, my parents weren't convinced. They weren't fools. I reminded them that Marty's family was fiercely traditional. Premarital intimacy was out of the question. Marty and I had always conducted ourselves properly. If my parents pressed the issue and caused a scene, the Vances could easily call off the wedding. Marty was a highly desirable match. Countless women would leap at the chance to marry him. That was enough to silence my family. They were so close to the finish line, they were terrified of jeopardizing it. During my lunch break, I snuck away to the hospital for confirmation. The results shattered me. I confided in Maya. She laid out two stark choices. The first, terminate the pregnancy quietly and continue with the wedding. Marty's infidelities didn't obligate me to guilt. I could maintain the life I had been planning. The second, make Jaxon take responsibility. He would never marry me, but I could secure a substantial settlement, abort the pregnancy, move to a new city, and start fresh, still a comfortable life, though not the one I had envisioned. Maya repeatedly cautioned me to stay rational, to avoid rash decisions. Her advice resonated. She had grown up with me. She knew the pattern of my thoughts better than anyone. My mind urged pragmatism, take what I could, prioritize security. But my heart resisted. The ethics, the ideals I had clung to, told me otherwise. I didn't want to compromise my principles, even if I felt undeserving. So I hated myself. Clear-headed yet paralyzed, joyful yet pained, I was unraveling. Finally, I knew I had to decide. I called Marty, something I rarely did. His life was full, and I hated the thought of disturbing him. Texts would have been safer. He could respond if he wished, or ignore me entirely. But when he agreed to meet, he arrived quickly, concern lighting up his face. "Clara, you hardly ever call," he said, forcing a smile. "You need to be a little more attentive." His phone buzzed on the table. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. Isabel, the pregnant friend. Her presence had been a constant shadow lately. While I tried on wedding dresses, arranged the venue, or coordinated the catering, Isabel's calls reminded me that Marty had another life, another obligation. Marty hadn't lied. Their child would not interfere with our relationship, and it wouldn't appear on the family registry. Still, he was the father, and she had every right to expect his involvement in prenatal appointments, baby preparations, and nursery setup. Watching Marty balance our wedding planning with Isabel's demands was infuriating and heartbreaking at once. Love, I realized, was cruelly irrational. Isabel was brilliant, enviable, and yet caught herself in a trap she couldn't escape. I no longer cared about comparisons or fairness. I lifted the diamond ring from my finger and slid it across the table to Marty. "Here. You should have this back," I said. His smile faltered. "I'm sorry, Marty," I whispered. "I can't marry you. I cheated." Marty didn't believe me at first. To him, the idea that I'd been unfaithful was absurd, completely out of character for the good, sensible woman he thought he knew. No matter how seriously I spoke, he assumed I was just being dramatic, maybe even trying to guilt-trip him. He promised to fix everything. Said the issue with the other woman would never interfere with our relationship again, that he'd be more devoted, more attentive. He even swore he'd cut off every friend who had ever crossed a line. I could see he truly believed his words. So I showed him the test results. It was ironic. He'd cheated and gotten someone pregnant. Now I'd done the same. In a twisted way, we were even. Marty stared at the paper in silence, then crushed it in his hand. After a long pause, he said quietly, "I've wronged you more times than I can count. So, maybe this makes us equal. End it, Clara. Get rid of it, and I'll forget this ever happened." "I can't," I told him. "I'm keeping the baby." That child was the only thing anchoring me, the only proof that I hadn't completely lost myself to darkness. Marty's next question was sharp and deliberate. "Who's the father?" "It doesn't matter," I said. "This child is mine alone." After that night, I had cut Jaxon out of my life entirely, blocked his number, deleted every contact, and avoided every place he might appear. Word of my engagement had already reached him. Knowing his pride, he'd never reach out again. That was how it should have stayed. But Marty's expression shifted, and he asked in a low voice, "It's Jaxon's, isn't it?" I froze. My silence told him everything. Of course, he had already guessed. The slap I'd given Jaxon at the campsite, followed by his insistence on driving me home afterward, it had been too telling. Marty had known all along, but chosen not to say a word. In their circle, lovers often recycled between friends. It wasn't shocking to them, it was simply how things worked. Then Marty asked, "Did you ever love me, Clara?" I blinked at him, unsure how to respond. He gave a soft, humorless laugh. When I used to end things with other women, they always asked me that. I thought it was pathetic then. Adults know what this is. Why make it sentimental? His smile faltered as he exhaled. Now I get it. I finally understand how they must have felt. "You're just not used to being the one left behind," I said quietly. He chuckled, a sad sort of sound. "Maybe. I thought you were the one who'd never walk away. Guess I was wrong." The one who had always feared losing love was now the one being abandoned. Then, after a moment, he looked at me and said, "Have you thought about letting me raise the baby?" I stared at him, stunned. "What?" He gave a half smile. "Relax, I'm joking." But I could see something in his eyes that wasn't entirely a joke. "All right," he sighed. "Since you've made up your mind, I won't stop you. Just know that raising a child alone isn't easy." I smiled faintly. "Thank you for letting me go." That was all I could ask for, a clean, quiet ending. I got up to leave. Out of courtesy, he offered to drive me home. I refused. He didn't argue. "Go ahead, then. I'll stay here a bit longer." As I walked toward the door, I turned back once. He was still sitting there, turning the ring over in his hand. I found a small apartment and started packing for the move. I didn't tell my parents about the breakup. I couldn't deal with their outrage on top of everything else. I made a detailed checklist, working through each item like clockwork. On the way home from work one evening, I was thinking about maternity care centers. Since I couldn't rely on family, I'd need professional help when the time came. I planned to visit a few over the weekend. Lost in thought, I stepped into the elevator with my groceries. When the doors opened on my floor, I froze. Jaxon was standing by my door. A small pile of cigarette butts lay at his feet, and an unlit one rested between his fingers. He looked up at the sound of the elevator, his eyes dark, unreadable. Instinctively, I spun around and jabbed at the closed door button, desperate to get away. But he was faster. His hand shot out, catching the door before it could shut. Then he stepped inside, forcing me backward until my spine hit the wall. "Why you?" My voice trembled. Let's just talk calmly, please." Calmly, he said, his tone deceptively soft. "You block my number, ignore my messages, disappear for weeks, and you call that calm?" His gaze dropped to my stomach. A slow, knowing smile curved his lips. "You're carrying my child, and didn't even tell me. That takes guts." His voice was gentle, but that was what scared me most. Jaxon's temper always hid behind gentleness. The quieter he became, the more dangerous he was. "I wasn't going to make you responsible," I whispered. "I promise I won't bother you." "So obedient," he murmured, brushing a thumb along my cheek. "Should I reward you for that?" My breath hitched. Words failed me. With Jaxon, I never stood a chance. He studied me for a long time, then sighed. Forget it. His voice dropped low. Clara, I gave you 2 chances. There won't be a third. He leaned closer, his eyes burning. From now on, we're bound together, whether it's love or hate. Until death. Epilogue 1. Jaxon had always been a complicated man, a mix of selfishness and charm, capable of cruelty, but also fleeting kindness. The one act that could be called good in his life was ending things with Clara. From the beginning, he knew they came from different worlds. They could never truly belong to one another. Yet he couldn't resist indulging his selfishness, feeding his craving for her warmth. The closer he got, the hungrier he became. Before he could lose himself entirely, before his emotions were consumed, he chose to walk away. He wanted to feel desire and control, not helplessly controlled by someone else. He wanted to smile when she appeared and remain indifferent when she didn't. So he sank deeper into his own darkness, revealing only his harshest side to her. In his mind, it was for the best. After being exposed to a man like him, she would never be fooled by anyone again. Faithful? Devoted? Jaxon had never been either. He rarely thought of her after their breakup, and when his life took new turns, he threw himself into them harder, seeking thrills that reminded him he was alive. And yet, sometimes, rarely, Clara's face surfaced in his thoughts. In a world that otherwise blurred around him, she remained vivid, real. 2. They met again at the coffee shop. Jaxon overheard Clara discussing her willingness to step into the role of stepmother just to stay with Marty. Something stirred in him. Resentment, jealousy, longing. He watched as she cared for Marty, with a devotion reminiscent of how she had once cared for him. A new, unfamiliar feeling took root. Envy. Every look, every action she gave to Marty felt like a small knife to Jaxon's pride. He wanted to offer her everything Marty could, yet she refused him. The one thing he couldn't offer was marriage, and the one thing she desired most was exactly that. Did she really think that a union with Marty would guarantee loyalty or affection? Impossible. Both of them could cheat. Faithfulness was no certainty. 3. While Clara avoided him, Jaxon developed a quiet, almost obsessive routine. Each evening, he parked across from her building, watching the soft glow of her apartment light. It wasn't for him, and he knew it. Yet seeing it brought him a strange sense of calm. He accepted the reality that she was marrying Marty. Life had been unfair, and some treasures were simply out of reach. His body, his love, his very soul felt too tainted to claim her. Regret gnawed at him, regret for his recklessness, for his selfish choices. But there were no second chances. He could only mask his longing, tell himself it was fine, and believe, if only partially, that they were never meant to be. Still, a quiet voice lingered. Why not me? 4. In time, Jaxon and Clara married. They had a child, a bundle of love and happiness, and outwardly, their family was flawless. Clara never pried into Jaxon's private life. She held firm to the symbolic tether of their marriage, like a kite attached to a string in his hand. So long as he held it, she stayed close. The moment he let go, she could drift away forever. But Jaxon kept hold. The man who once mocked loyalty now strove to maintain it, building a fragile, careful web of devotion. Clara lived to 80, passing peacefully, with only her wish for her family's happiness. A month later, Jaxon followed. Before dying, he murmured repeatedly, "The string is broken. My kite is gone." Only his granddaughter, Clara's mirror and temperament, truly understood. She retrieved Clara's urn and placed it in his arms. "Grandpa, your kite is right here." Jaxon, with his last strength, hugged it tightly. At last, he rested, knowing his kite was safe. 5. As for Marty, some questions lingered. Had he loved Clara, or had he simply depended on her? Could he truly distinguish between affection and attachment? He had informed Jaxon of her pregnancy, and his offer to be a father wasn't a jest. Yet human emotions proved more complex than he could untangle. In the end, he stopped trying to answer. Regardless of the reasons, he had already lost her.